Hello everybody, Adam Cleary from FourFourTwo here, and welcome to the first installment, I've still got this on, of Retro Tactics. We've been wanting to do something like this for a little while, and at the time of recording it's still somehow an international break, nothing else is going on, so we thought, why not? So this right here is Jose Mourinho's Chelsea from about 2004 to 2006. It is the most defensively solid, mathematically speaking, team the Premier League has ever seen. It won back-to-back championships, it won FA Cups, it won League Cups, it made the club's first ever serious forays into the latter stages of the Champions League. It is probably the most tactically innovative team the Premier League had ever seen. Alright, so a little bit of background. Chelsea obviously already had money by the time Mourinho had come in. Ranieri had finished second, and he'd also got to the semi-finals of the Champions League the season before, but they weren't quite cemented as one of the top clubs in the division. It was all very new to them. But then, as everybody knows, Jose Mourinho entered the fray and just honestly pretty much overnight transformed the club to having the sort of stature that it still has today. To be one of the big four in the Premier League, to be one of the top six. All these terms, they didn't really exist until then, but they did pretty much the second he walked in that door.
I'm European champion, so I'm not one of the bottle. I think I'm a special one.
And the way he did that was with this team, this system, this formation, these players. He gave the Premier League several things it had never seen before, and it took them 2 full seasons to work out how to do anything with it. Now obviously across 2 seasons loads of players come in and out, loads of players play very important roles even within the same system, so we've got it like this, but it could just as easily be Damien Duff in either of these wide positions. Essien and Thiago, they were both really important as that other 8 alongside Frank Lampard. Wayne Bridge and William Gallas, they both had about a season as the first choice left back in this system, and you could, people forget, but you could have Eidur Gudjohnsen in there instead of Didier Drogba. In fact, Eidur Gudjohnsen is a player we're going to talk about more in a little bit. But the key to all this, really, the man who literally invented a position for himself based on this team, is Claude Makelele. He sat in this sitting number 6 role at the base of a 4-3-3, something you see all the time now, but back then was just mind-blowing to English teams. And that's because, believe it or not, given the name of this YouTube channel and the magazine it produces content for, this country was really obsessed with 4-4-2 back then. Like, some teams would play it as a diamond, some players would have a holding midfielder and an attacking midfielder, some players would have a 4-4-1-1, or occasionally you might even see a back 3 every now and then, but by and large, in the Premier League, most weeks, most teams had some kind of 4-4-2, and what that meant was they always had 2 central midfielders. And we could do a whole other video on why that was, but it's fairly common sense. It gives you great balance across the pitch. You have 2 players in pretty much every single position. You've got 2 players on the flanks, you've got 2 players in central defence, you've got 2 players in the middle of the pitch, you've got 2 players up front. There are 2s everywhere, so you're never lopsided, and it's not easy to break you down. And even in Mourinho's own words, the whole reason he played this system was because the 4-4-2 was so popular in the Premier League. Like, he's literally quoted as saying, if I have a triangle in midfield, I always have an advantage against a pure 4-4-2 where the central midfielders are side by side. And that's precisely what Makelele was for. Like, Petr, one of the greatest goalkeepers in the history of the Premier League, couldn't kick, couldn't really distribute the ball well. That's not what the game was about, and there was no onus on the goalkeeper to be able to find players across the pitch with his kicking. So when Chelsea wanted to play out from the back, which they had to against most teams who were sitting off them, the centre-backs they would split a little bit, Terry and Carvalho. The full-backs would push slightly further up, and Makelele would drop to about here, and he would find one of these 3 players with his first kick out every single time. Now, another thing that was totally innovative back there was Terry and Carvalho. You tended to, at most, have one sort of ball-playing centre-back, but that wasn't really a defender's job back then. They were a luxury to have, but you wanted someone who could head, kick, tackle, mark, do all the conventional things, and here in this Chelsea side, you had 2 ball-playing centre-backs. Now, John Terry does not get enough credit for his on-the-ball ability because the game rapidly caught up with him and then surpassed him during his career. But at this point, in 04, 05, 06, he was so far ahead of the curve in what he could do in possession. Both he and Carvalho would receive the ball in this sort of area, and if the opposition sat off them, they would be free to carry this forward up the pitch and help the rest of the team advance. But if the opposition didn't sit off them and try to challenge them for that ball, then it would almost always go into Makelele, and that's when they would have problems. And this is the whole idea with having 3 players in central midfield, because it gives you 5 players in this area. So if you imagine this is some other team, they're 2 centre forwards, they've gone and closed down Terry and Carvalho so they can't play the ball forward. That leaves you with 2 central midfielders marking Chelsea's other 2 central midfielders. Now, assuming either Terry, Carvalho or Cech can then get that ball into Makelele, what do you do? These 2 don't really want to start chasing back because that's no way to defend. Makelele's just free to go through and you're running after him. And if one of these 2 then decide to move forward, well, now you've got a free man in central midfield. Pretty much one of the few places on the pitch you can't ever afford to leave a spare man. All right, okay, so maybe what you do is you play like a 4-4-1-1 instead then, so you can put a player in this pocket here to stop Makelele getting on the ball. All right, you've kind of matched them up, but now you can't really defend against Terry and Carvalho, 2 ball-playing centre-backs who will very happily then just find players further up the pitch. Oh, but wait, hang on, you've got wingers, haven't you? And they're kind of in this area of the pitch. So maybe what you do is you say one of your midfielders can push onto Makelele when he gets onto the ball, but one of your wide men, he's got to then tuck inside to mark the other central midfielder, thus not leaving you exposed. That'll work, won't it? Well, again, no, because now you've left one of Chelsea's fullbacks free, and in this Chelsea system, they were also doing something very innovative with fullbacks. Like, if you don't remember this period in football, this is going to sound ridiculous, but prior to Mourinho coming into the Premier League, fullbacks as standard virtually did no attacking. They were still seen as defenders. Like, yes, there were some that were ahead of their time and would do this job in certain teams, but it wasn't really seen as part of their job spec to get down the line and get up the pitch. But in this Mourinho side, that's what he instructed them to do. He wanted them to physically carry the ball up the wing and, on occasion, provide the width for sort of an attacking front 5. And why would you have them provide the wing though when you've got these 2 excellent wide attackers in a 4-3-3? Surely they should be nice and wide. And yes, they were, and part of their job was to get to the byline like traditional wingers were doing and to put crosses onto Drogba's head. But also, Mourinho would quite often invert his wingers. He would switch them over mid-game. He would switch them over several times in the same game, and if you found yourself on the side where you weren't on your strong foot, your job was to then come inside and effectively play along the centre forward. It was inverted wingers before inverted wingers were really a thing. And if you can picture a winger inverting on this side, then the fullback making the run to provide the width there, and then one of the number 8s, usually Frank Lampard, arriving late to support the centre forward, you've got this really dangerous attacking front 5 that can be formed several different ways on different sides of the pitch and is virtually impossible to track the runs of. The only difference between this sort of front 5 and the kind of front 5 that Pep does now is that rather than the defenders shuffling around into a back 3, you'd then have Makelele moving across into the space the fullback had vacated to always keep that steady 4 there. And as ridiculous as it looks, Chelsea would quite often end up in situations where they still had a full back 4 and then one player, either Thiago or Essien, sort of patrolling this space, and then just 5 attackers. And this is why it genuinely bugs me when I hear this Chelsea team being referred to as like a defensive, stable, quite boring outfit. Like, yes, they only conceded 15 goals, and that's incredible, but that was mostly because they dominated the ball so much, not because they were negative. They scored something like 74, 75 goals that season. They were second only behind Arsenal. They were a forward-thinking, attacking side. They created loads of chances. But the reason this was so hard to defend against, though, is we have sort of formed this front 5 using the left-hand side of the pitch, right? So we've got Makelele here. He's shuffled across, but that's because the full-back went up that way, and that winger inverted, and then that number 8, etc., etc. But they would do that on the opposite side just as freely. Like, Mourinho didn't play with 2 overlapping fullbacks and 2 inverted wingers. He would only play with 1 at a time. But during the course of the game, they would change which side that was happening from. So just imagine it again, over on this side this time, the winger, he inverts, comes across to about here. That fullback then gets all the way up. and provides the width. This number 8 now gets into the front 5. Makelele then sweeps across to the right-hand side to cover that space, and you've got the exact same shape all over again. So, long story short here, with Makelele as the pivot in the base of a 3 and fullbacks that could come at you overlapping from each side, and wingers that could both invert and get to the byline to provide their own width, and 2 separate number 8s who were really happy getting up front with Drogba. Chelsea, in their build-up phase when they were creating attacks, could either go through the middle because they had numerical superiority, or they could go down the flanks where they could hurt you in so many different ways. And again, I'll just keep saying this, ball-playing centre-backs, an overlapping fullback, inverting wingers, and 3 players in midfield. You just see that every single game now. But back in 04, my friends, nobody had a clue what was going on. But for all the innovating Jose Mourinho did, for all the things you'd never seen before, there was one thing Chelsea were absolutely brilliant at, which was quintessentially British. And that was, when the situation called for it, they could go route 1 better than anyone in the league. Cech to Drogba was a weapon all its own. And if you've been sitting there doing the maths, counting on your fingers, thinking, hang on, if they've got numerical superiority in this part of the pitch, surely that only happens because they've got numerical unsuperiority, which is probably a word, in that area of a pitch. Because if they were playing 4-4-2, they'd have 2 wingers and 2 strikers, so that's 4 players, and the defence has got 4 players in it. So now you're at a disadvantage. Surely that's where that should be a problem. But no, my friends, because that is the beauty of Didier Drogba. He got a lot of criticism in his first 2 seasons at Chelsea because he wasn't a prolific goal scorer. He had arrived at a high reputation for a high fee to supposedly the most ambitious club in the land, and he wasn't bagging them in for fun every single game. But that is not what made Drogba a world-class player in this team. It was his ability to bully defenders, to bring his teammates into play. Chelsea scored loads of goals, not because he was the one putting them in the net, but because he was so important to the system that created them. Now, as we've said, back then, pretty much every team, not all, but pretty much every single team had a back 4, so you can visualize it here. It's easy to see they are man for man in the wide areas, and theoretically, they've got an advantage over Drogba. Frank Lampard's main job in this Chelsea side was to be arriving late into the box to either get on the end of crosses or to offer a pullback option, to be an unmarked threat. And you can see, theoretically, that's really easy. 1 defender marks Drogba and 1 watches for Lampard's run. So how did Lampard score so many goals in this team? Well, it's a combination of 2 things. First of all, that Frank Lampard was undeniably the best player in the world at the time for timing a late run into the box. It was just really hard to defend against anyway, but also because this chap here wasn't watching for Frank Lampard. This chap here was helping to mark Drogba. So often in games, Drogba would be able to physically tie up both centre-backs, swapping between which one was marking him, the other never feeling totally confident in passing him on or letting him go, and that would always create loads of room for Lampard to get in. And it wasn't just Lampard either, by the way. When you've got wide players who are looking to invert, and you've got a centre-back who's been drawn away from that area because they're watching Drogba, and a full-back who doesn't really want to get dragged into cover, then there's a whole area for them to play in. He was a space-creating machine. And in even more Mike Bassett terms than that, he was always an option against a high defensive line to just win a flick on and allow either of the wide players or Lampard to run beyond him into that space. Like, the guy, it's such a classically British type of centre forward to have in what's such a innovative European system to play. Like, you know when you go to a nice hotel and they give you a continental breakfast and sort of nice little pastries and some jams and stuff and some little cooked meats, right? Imagine that, you slab a load of peas pudding on it, right? That was Drogba in this system. Beautiful. The thing is, it wasn't always Drogba, right? And the reason at the start of the video I said we were going to come back to Eidur Gudjohnsen is because he's very much like the forgotten player of this team. Maybe not the Chelsea fans, maybe you all remember the contribution he had to this and how important he was to this Mourinho system. But I think if you asked any other fan from any other club to rattle off who made the most appearances for Chelsea in Mourinho's first season, I don't think any of them would guess Gudjohnsen. And he did. He started 30 Premier League games in Mourinho's first season. In fact, in total appearances, when you include substitutes, he was the 2nd most used player for Mourinho that year. Genuinely. Because while he did play up top instead of Drogba in a number of games, he also played as the other 8 in the midfield alongside Frank Lampard. And he also occasionally played out wide when he was useful in that sort of context. But also, this is the system Mourinho used to control games in a league that everybody played 4-4-2. Sometimes he didn't want to control the game. Sometimes he would genuinely, and brace yourself for this, just play a 4-4-2. Makelele would slot in alongside Lampard in the centre of midfield to allow Lampard to use his frankly very underrated passing range and just general midfield busybody activities, which you just hardly ever saw at Chelsea, but he could definitely do it. The 2 wide attackers, they had played at wingers at their previous clubs. It was the traditional role for their sort of players back then. And then just 2 centre forwards. They would occasionally just line up like this. I mean, not against the big sides, and certainly not often, but the reason Eidur Gudjohnsen started 30 Premier League games and Drogba still started 18 was because this was an option. He was very versatile and could do loads of different things, but this also was something they could just do. This meant that Mourinho could simultaneously give the Premier League something it had never seen before, but also take it on at its own game. And when you've got those 2 things all going on at once, you win the league, and you only concede 15 goals in the process. And then, of course, there's all the other stuff behind it. There's the psychology involved. There's what a great manager Mourinho was at the time. Like, he instilled this underdog belief in such a massive club, which was really, really useful. They felt like it was them against the world in every single game. You read any player from this team's autobiography, and they either literally say or figuratively say, I would have died for that man. And they did for like 2 whole seasons. And that's why I think they're one of the most tactically interesting teams the Premier League has ever seen. Like, I don't remember a team coming along, playing a particular system and doing loads of different things for the very first time, and you still seeing so many of them 10, 15, getting on for 20 years later. So yes, if you enjoyed that, and I really, really did, please do consider subscribing to us here on 442. We're hoping to make these a sort of regular thing. If you saw the David Beckham video we did off the back of his documentary, that was kind of us little dipping our toes in the water to see if anything based in the past would do quite well, and it did, so here we are. But if you've got any suggestions for the kind of teams we should look at in the future, like Man United's treble winners, Arsenal's invincibles, Keegan's entertainers, I'll definitely be doing that. Please do drop them in the comments as well. And also, if you've got a better name than just Retro Tactics, put that in as well, because I'll probably use it. In the meantime, though, grab me on Twitter, because I just still call it that, at Adam Cleary, Clery, Instagram, Threads, like I'm absolutely everywhere. 442, all of our socials are in the corner of the video for your clicking pleasure at any time you wish. But until next time, I'm away to just listen to loads of mid-noughties landfill indie, because to me, that's what this team sounded like. Bye!